The sky above New York City was a sickly shade of gray, streaked with black smoke that rose from the ruins of once majestic skyscrapers. The streets were empty, except for the occasional patrol of soldiers in battered uniforms, their faces hardened by months of relentless fighting. The world had changed, and not for the better. The Vrathis had arrived without warning, their massive ships blotting out the sun as they descended upon Earth like vultures circling prey. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen, and their intentions were clear. They wanted Earth, and they didn't care who stood in their way. John Carter sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, staring blankly at the wall. He hadn't left the place in weeks, not since the invasion began. The chaos outside felt distant, muffled by the thick concrete walls and his own exhaustion. Once he had been a celebrated physicist, known for his groundbreaking work on quantum energy systems. Now he was just another survivor, trying to make sense of a world falling apart. His desk was cluttered with papers, notes scrawled in frantic handwriting and half-empty coffee cups. He hadn't slept properly in days, maybe longer. Sleep felt like a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. A knock at the door startled him. It wasn't loud, but it was insistent. John hesitated, glancing at the peephole before opening the door slightly. On the other side stood Lieutenant Rachel Monroe, her posture rigid, her uniform crisp despite the dust clinging to it. She looked tired but determined, her sharp eyes scanning the room behind him before settling on his face. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice firm but calm. "We need to talk." John sighed, stepping aside to let her in. "If this is about joining some committee or advisory board, I'm not interested," he muttered, closing the door behind her. "I've done my part. Let someone else figure it out." Rachel ignored his tone, walking further into the room and turning to face him. "This isn't about committees or boards," she said. "It's about survival. Yours, mine, everyone's. We're losing this war, Dr. Carter. If we don't find a solution soon, there won't be anything left to save." John crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "And you think I'm the guy to fix it? Look around." "Lieutenant, I'm barely holding myself together." "That might be true," Rachel admitted. "But you're also one of the smartest people alive. You've spent years studying energy systems, pushing boundaries no one else even thought possible. Right now, we need someone like you. Not just smart, but willing to take risks." John shook his head, turning away. "You don't understand. I can't—" "It's not just about you," Rachel interrupted, her voice softening slightly. "Your sister, Emily Dawson, was part of a research team sent to Antarctica. They found something down there, something big. Something that could turn the tide of this war. But now they're missing. All communication has stopped." John froze, his breath catching in his throat. Emily. Her name hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't spoken to her in months, not since their last argument over his refusal to leave the city when the attacks began. She'd begged him to come with her, to help with the project she was working on, but he'd brushed her off, too caught up in his own grief and guilt to listen. And now, she was gone. "What do you mean, missing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Their last transmission mentioned discovering an artifact buried deep beneath the ice. Preliminary scans suggest it's ancient, possibly predating human civilization. There were anomalies, unexplained energy readings, strange phenomena reported by the team. Then silence. "We don't know what happened, but we do know one thing. Whatever they found, the Vrathis want it too." John sank into a chair, his mind racing. The thought of Emily trapped, or worse, was unbearable. But even worse was the idea that he might have let her down again, just like he had so many times before. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked finally, looking up at Rachel. "Because I believe you're the only person who can figure out what that artifact is, and how to use it," she replied. "If there's any chance it can help us fight back, we need to take it. And if there's any chance your sister is still alive, we need to find her." John stared at her, his heart pounding. He wanted to say no, to shut the door and go back, to hiding from the world. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. Not this time. Emily had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. If there was even the smallest chance he could save her or the rest of humanity, he had to try. "Fine," he said after a long pause. "I'll do it. But I'm doing this for Emily, not for you or anyone else." Rachel nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "That's all I ask. Pack what you need. We leave in an hour." As Rachel turned to leave, John stayed seated, staring at the floor. For the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was close enough. Close enough to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Over the next few days, John and Rachel traveled south, heading toward the icy expanse of Antarctica. The journey was grueling, the cold biting through layers of clothing and numbing exposed skin within minutes. John wasn't used to such harsh conditions, and it showed in the way he stumbled through the snow, his breath visible in short puffs of vapor. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed unfazed, her military training evident in every confident stride. Tension simmered between them, a mix of mutual distrust and unspoken expectations. John resented Rachel's constant prodding, her insistence on sticking to schedules and protocols. To him, she represented everything wrong with the world, a rigid system that had failed to protect its people. Rachel, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated with John's reluctance to open up, his tendency to retreat into silence whenever things got difficult. "You're going to have to trust me eventually," she said one evening as they huddled around a small fire inside a makeshift shelter. "We're a team now, whether you like it or not." "I don't remember signing up for a team," John shot back, wrapping his hands around a steaming mug of tea. "I'm here because of Emily, that's it. And I'm here because billions of lives depend on us figuring this out," Rachel countered. "So maybe try acting like it matters to you." John opened his mouth to retort but stopped himself. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand what he was going through. But the truth was, she did. In her own way, Rachel was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, just like him. Maybe they weren't so different after all. Finally, after days of travel, they reached the excavation site. What remained of the research facility was little more than rubble, crushed under the weight of collapsed ice and debris. The air was eerily quiet, broken only by the sound of their boots crunching against the frozen ground. "This is it," Rachel said, her voice low as she surveyed the wreckage. "Whatever they found, it's here somewhere." John nodded, stepping cautiously into the ruins. The sight of shattered equipment and abandoned supplies filled him with a mixture of dread and determination. Somewhere in this mess was a clue, a piece of the puzzle that could lead him to Emily, and perhaps to salvation for the rest of humanity. As he began sifting through the debris, John couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The silence around them felt unnatural, almost oppressive. Whatever secrets lay buried beneath the ice, they were watching, waiting. And John knew deep down that the answers wouldn't come easily. The ruins of the research facility were a maze of twisted metal and shattered ice. Each step John and Rachel took revealing more signs of devastation. The air was cold and sharp, biting at their skin and making it hard to breathe deeply. John moved slowly, his eyes scanning the ground for anything that might offer a clue about what had happened here. Rachel stayed close behind, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm, her gaze darting around as if expecting an attack at any moment. It didn't take long for them to find the first piece of evidence, a cracked tablet lying half buried in the snow. John knelt down, brushing away the frost, to reveal fragments of data still visible on the cracked screen. Most of it was unreadable, but one phrase stood out: energy readings off the charts. He frowned, turning the device over in his hands. Whatever the team had discovered, it wasn't just unusual. It was extraordinary. Rachel crouched beside him, her voice low and steady. "Anything useful?" "Maybe," John replied, slipping the tablet into his pack. "But I need more context. There's got to be something else around here." They continued searching, moving deeper into the wreckage. The further they went, the more unsettling the scene became. Equipment lay scattered everywhere, some pieces scorched as though caught in an intense heat source. Personal belongings, notebooks, jackets, even a child's toy, were strewn about, abandoned in haste. It looked less like an accident and more like a panicked evacuation, or worse, an attack. Then they found the logs. A partially intact workstation sat wedged between two collapsed walls, its screen flickering weakly despite the cold. John pressed a few buttons, coaxing it back to life. The interface was sluggish, but eventually he managed to access a series of audio recordings left by the researchers. Each entry painted a picture of growing unease and mounting danger. The earliest logs described the artifact as a crystalline structure embedded deep within the ice, its surface shimmering with faint, pulsating light. Initial scans suggested it was dormant, emitting only trace amounts of energy. But as the days passed, the tone of the entries shifted. Researchers spoke of strange sensations: headaches, dizziness, vivid dreams, and unexplained phenomena like equipment malfunctions and sudden temperature spikes. One log in particular caught John's attention. It was recorded by Emily. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her words rushed and disjointed. "We've made contact, or at least we think we have. The artifact, it's not just a relic. It's alive in a way I can't explain. And it's trying to communicate. I hear voices, whispers in my mind. They're warning us about something, but I don't know what. We need to stop digging. We need to leave this place." John's chest tightened as he listened, his fingers gripping the edge of the workstation. The recording ended abruptly, leaving behind only static. He replayed it twice, hoping to catch some detail he'd missed, but there was nothing more. Emily's fear was palpable, her desperation clear. She had known something terrible was coming, and now she was gone. Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "We'll find her," she said quietly, "but we need to focus. If this thing is as dangerous as it sounds, we can't afford to lose sight of why we're here." John nodded, forcing himself to push aside his emotions. He knew she was right. For now, the artifact was their priority. Without it, they had no hope of fighting back against the Vrathis. With renewed determination, he began piecing together the information from the logs, mapping out where the artifact might be located based on the researchers' descriptions. It didn't take long to find it. Deep within the heart of the ruins, surrounded by jagged shards of ice, stood the artifact. It was taller than John had imagined, its crystalline form glowing faintly with an inner light that seemed almost alive. The air around it hummed softly, vibrating against his skin like a gentle electric current. He approached cautiously, his breath fogging the air in front of him. As he drew closer, the sensation grew stronger, filling his mind with a strange mixture of awe and dread. The artifact pulsed rhythmically, as if responding to his presence. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing its smooth surface. In that instant, everything changed. A flood of images assaulted his mind, overwhelming his senses. He saw civilizations rising and falling, stars exploding into supernovas, battles fought across galaxies. He witnessed beings of unimaginable power wielding weapons forged from pure energy, their forms shifting and fluid like liquid light. And then, amidst the chaos, he saw Emily. She stood before him, her face pale but determined, her lips moving, soundlessly. He strained to hear her, but the vision faded as quickly as it had come. When John opened his eyes, he was on the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. Rachel knelt beside him, concern etched across her face. "What happened?" she asked, helping him sit up. "I don't know," John admitted, his voice hoarse. "I touched it and I don't even know how to describe it. It's like it showed me things, memories, but not mine. Someone else's." Rachel studied the artifact, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think it's sentient? Or maybe some kind of recording device?" "I don't know," John repeated. "But whatever it is, it's powerful. More powerful than anything we've ever encountered." Before they could discuss it further, a loud rumble echoed through the ruins. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, sending chunks of ice crashing down around them. John scrambled to his feet, grabbing Rachel's arm to steady her. "What was that?" Rachel's eyes widened as she pointed toward the horizon. "Look." In the distance, dark shapes loomed against the gray sky. Ships, Vrathi's ships, descending rapidly toward their location. They weren't alone anymore. "We need to move," Rachel said urgently, pulling John toward the shelter of a nearby crevice. "If they're here, it means they know about the artifact too." John hesitated, glancing back at the glowing crystal. Leaving it felt wrong, like abandoning a part of himself. But he knew they had no choice. If they stayed, they'd be captured, or worse. Reluctantly, he followed Rachel, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. As they took cover, John couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact had chosen him somehow, that the visions it had shown him were more than random flashes of memory. He didn't understand it yet, but one thing was certain. The artifact held answers, and those answers were worth fighting for. The Vrathi's ships landed with a deafening roar, their massive forms blotting out the sun. Soldiers poured out, their movements precise and mechanical, their weapons trained on the ruins. John and Rachel watched from their hiding spot, hearts pounding as the invaders began sweeping the area. "They're looking for it," Rachel whispered. "Just like we are." John nodded, his jaw clenched. "And they won't stop until they find it." For now, all they could do was wait and hope for an opening. The artifact was their only chance, and they couldn't let it fall into enemy hands. Whatever happened next, John knew one thing for sure. The stakes had never been higher. John and Rachel crouched low in the shadows, their breaths visible in the freezing air as they watched the Vrathi soldiers comb through the ruins. The invaders moved with cold efficiency, their weapons glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Every step they took sent a shiver down John's spine, not just from the biting cold, but from the weight of what was at stake. If the Vrathis found the artifact, it would mean the end, not just for them, but for all of humanity. Rachel shifted slightly, her voice barely audible. "We can't stay here forever. They'll find us eventually." John nodded, his mind racing. He knew she was right, but their options were limited. Fighting back wasn't an option. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Trying to sneak past the soldiers seemed equally impossible, given how methodically they were searching the area. For a moment, despair threatened to take hold, but then he remembered the artifact, its pulsating glow, its hum, the flood of images it had shown him. There had to be a way to use it, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. "We need to get back to the artifact," John whispered, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. "It's our only chance." Rachel turned to him, her brow furrowed. "Are you sure? You said yourself you don't know what it is or how it works. What if it's dangerous?" "It's dangerous either way," John replied. "If we leave it, the Vrathis will take it. And if they figure out how to use it before we do, it's over. At least with me, there's a chance." Rachel hesitated, studying his face. She wanted to argue, to tell him this was reckless and irresponsible, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. They were running out of time, and desperate times called for desperate measures. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but we do this together." They waited until the Vrathi's soldiers moved farther away, their attention focused on another section of the ruins. Then, moving as quietly as possible, John and Rachel slipped out of their hiding spot and made their way back toward the artifact. Each step felt like walking on thin ice, every sound amplified in the eerie silence. John's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help anyone. When they reached the artifact, John stopped, staring at its shimmering surface. The hum it emitted seemed louder now, almost like it was calling to him. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against the cool crystal. Instantly, the same rush of sensations flooded his mind, images of stars, battles, civilizations rising and falling. But this time, something was different. Amidst the chaos, he felt a presence, ancient and vast, watching him. "Waiting, John," Rachel whispered urgently, snapping him out of his trance. "What are you doing?" "I think I can interface with it," John said, his voice trembling with both excitement and fear. "It's showing me things, teaching me. If I can connect directly, maybe I can harness its power." Rachel's eyes widened. "You mean like linking your mind to it? That's insane. What if it kills you?" "It might," John admitted, turning to face her. "But if I don't try, we're dead anyway. Trust me, Rachel. Please." For a long moment, Rachel didn't respond. She looked at him, her expression torn between doubt and determination. Finally, she let out a slow breath. "Fine. But if anything goes wrong, I'm pulling you out. No arguments." John nodded, grateful for her support even as his stomach churned with nerves. Using fragments of equipment salvaged from the ruins, he rigged together a crude neural interface. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. As he worked, Rachel kept watch, her weapon drawn and ready in case the Vrathis returned. When the device was ready, John strapped it onto his head, the electrodes pressing against his temples. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and activated the interface. A jolt of energy surged through him, sharp and overwhelming. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he might pass out. But then the artifact responded, its glow intensifying as it synced with his mind. Images flooded his consciousness faster than before, clearer and more vivid. He saw the artifact's creators, beings of pure energy who had used it as a tool for creation and destruction. He learned how it functioned, how it could manipulate matter and energy on a fundamental level. Most importantly, he understood its potential. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a key to reshaping reality itself. But with that knowledge came a warning. The artifact demanded focus, control. If he lost either, the consequences could be catastrophic. Pushing the thought aside, John concentrated, channeling the artifact's power outward. A shimmering barrier erupted around them, glowing brightly in the dim light. The Vrathi's soldiers froze, their weapons trained on the shield, but unable to penetrate it. Rachel stared in awe, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did it." "Not for long," John replied, his voice strained. Maintaining the shield was exhausting, draining him physically and mentally. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the freezing temperature, and his hands trembled as he fought to keep the connection stable. "We need to move, now." Rachel didn't argue. Grabbing his arm, she helped him stumble away from the artifact, keeping him upright as they retreated deeper into the ruins. Behind them, the Vrathis regrouped, shouting orders in their guttural language. The shield flickered and began to weaken, its glow dimming as John's strength waned. "Hold on," Rachel urged, her grip tightening. "Just a little farther." Finally, they reached a narrow tunnel partially hidden by fallen debris. Rachel pushed John inside, following close behind. The tunnel was dark and claustrophobic, the walls slick with ice, but it offered cover from the Vrathies. As they collapsed against the icy floor, gasping for breath, the shield collapsed entirely, leaving the ruins exposed once more. John slumped against the wall, his body shaking with exhaustion. His head throbbed where the electrodes had been attached, and his thoughts felt sluggish, disjointed. Rachel knelt beside him, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'll live," John muttered, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. The artifact's power had taken a toll on him, leaving him drained and disoriented. But they had bought themselves some time, and that was something. Rachel leaned back, letting out a shaky laugh. "That was insane, actually insane. Remind me never to let you do something like that again." John managed a weak smile, closing his eyes briefly. No promises. For a while they sat in silence, catching their breath and listening for signs of pursuit. The Vrathies hadn't followed them into the tunnel, at least not yet. Whether they were regrouping or searching elsewhere, John didn't know. All he knew was that they needed to keep moving, to put as much distance between themselves and the artifact as possible. As they prepared to leave the tunnel, John glanced back toward the ruins, his mind replaying the visions the artifact had shown. Him. He had seen Emily again, standing amidst the chaos, her face filled with urgency. She had been trying to warn him about something, but he still couldn't piece it together. Whatever the artifact was hiding, it was bigger than just a weapon. Bigger than any of them. "We need answers," John said suddenly, his voice firm despite his fatigue. "About the artifact, about the Vrathies, about everything. If we're going to win this, we can't fight blindly anymore." Rachel nodded, her expression hardening. "Then we find them. Together." With renewed determination, they set off. Into the icy wilderness, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on their shoulders. The artifact's power had given them a glimpse of hope, but it had also shown them the enormity of the challenge ahead. They were running out of time, and the cost of failure was unthinkable. As they trudged through the snow, John couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact was still with him, its presence lingering in the back of his mind. It had chosen him, for a reason, and whether he liked it or not, he was part of something far greater than himself. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The artifact held the key to humanity's survival, and unlocking its secrets would require everything they had and more. John and Rachel's journey back to the safety of a hidden underground bunker was long and grueling. The freezing winds cut through their layers of clothing, and the endless expanse of white stretched on endlessly, making it hard to tell how far they had come or how much farther they had to go. John's body ached from the strain of interfacing with the artifact, his mind still clouded with fragments of the visions it had shown him. He tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, but the weight of what he had seen and what he had done pressed heavily on him. Rachel walked beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. She hadn't said much since they left the ruins, her thoughts clearly occupied with the same questions that plagued John. What exactly was the artifact? How could they use it without losing control? And most importantly, could they trust it? Despite her stoic demeanor, John could see the tension in her movements, the way her hand hovered near her weapon, ready to act at a moment's notice. When they finally reached the bunker, a fortified structure buried deep beneath the ice, they were greeted by a team of soldiers and scientists who had been waiting anxiously for their return. The bunker was dimly lit, its walls lined with monitors displaying maps and data streams. The air inside was warmer than outside, but it carried a sterile, mechanical feel that did little to ease their exhaustion. One of the lead scientists, Dr. Laura Bennett, approached them immediately. Her face was pale, her expression grim. "We've received reports of increased Vrathis activity," she said, glancing between John and Rachel. "They're mobilizing for a final assault. If we don't act soon, there won't be anything left to defend." John nodded, his jaw tightening. He had expected as much. The Vrathes weren't just invaders. They were conquerors, methodical and relentless. They wouldn't stop until Earth was theirs. But knowing that didn't make the reality any easier to face. "We need to debrief," Rachel said firmly, gesturing, for John to follow her into a private room. Once inside, she closed the door behind them and turned to face him. "Tell me everything. What did you see when you connected with the artifact?" John hesitated, trying to put the chaotic swirl of images and sensations into words. "It showed me things," he began slowly. "Civilizations, wars, beings far more advanced than us. It's not just a weapon. It's a repository of knowledge, maybe even consciousness. Whoever created it intended it to guide others toward enlightenment, or destruction if misused." Rachel listened intently, her brow furrowed. "And Emily? Did you see her again?" John nodded, his voice softening. "Yes. She was trying to warn me about something, but I couldn't understand it. I think she's still alive, though, held captive aboard one of their ships." Rachel's expression hardened. "Then we need to get her back. And if we're going to do that, we'll need to use the artifact." John shook his head, frustration creeping into his tone. "I barely managed to harness its power last time. Pushing it further could kill me, or worse, destroy everything around us." "Then we find another way," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the urgency in her eyes. "You're not doing this alone. Whatever happens next, we're in it together." Over the next few hours, John and Rachel worked with the scientists to devise a plan. Using the data John had gathered during his connection with the artifact, they developed a way to amplify its energy remotely. The idea was risky, dangerously so, but it was their only chance. If successful, they could create a localized pulse strong enough to disable the Vrathis fleet temporarily, giving them an opening to infiltrate one of their ships and rescue Emily. As preparations continued, tensions ran high. Some members of the team argued that using the artifact as a weapon was reckless, that they were playing with forces they didn't fully understand. Others believed it was their only hope, that the risk was worth the potential reward. In the end, the decision came down to John. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by faces filled with doubt and fear. For a moment, he felt overwhelmed, the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. But then he thought of Emily, of her voice calling out to him from the artifact's depths. He thought of the billions of lives depending on him to make the right choice. Taking a deep breath, he looked at Rachel and nodded. "We do it," he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "But I'm going with you. If anyone is interfacing with the artifact, it's me." Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but John cut her off. "You said it yourself. We're in this together. That means no arguments." Reluctantly, Rachel agreed, and the team set to work finalizing the plan. They loaded the necessary equipment onto a small transport vehicle designed to withstand the harsh conditions of Antarctica. As they prepared to leave, John took a moment to look around the bunker, memorizing the faces of the people counting on him. He didn't know if he'd see them again, but he vowed silently to give everything he had to make sure they survived. The journey to the Vrathis fleet was harrowing. The transport vehicle moved cautiously across the icy terrain, its engines groaning under the strain. Above them, the alien ships loomed like dark clouds, their massive forms blotting out the stars. John sat in silence, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Rachel stayed close, her presence a quiet reassurance amidst the chaos. When they reached the edge of the Vrathis perimeter, they parked the vehicle and continued on foot, using the artifact's cloaking capabilities to mask their approach. The closer they got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, the hum of the alien technology vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. John could feel the artifact responding to their proximity, its energy pulsing faintly in sync with his heartbeat. Finally, they reached the base of one of the ships. It towered above them, its sleek surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. Rachel scanned the area, her voice low and urgent. "This is it. Ready?" John nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he activated the interface. The familiar rush of energy surged through him, stronger this time, almost overwhelming. He gritted his teeth, focusing on maintaining control as the artifact's power flowed outward, creating a ripple effect that disrupted the ship's systems. Alarms blared in the distance, and the ground shook as the Vrathis scrambled to respond. "Go!" John said, his voice strained. "I'll hold the connection as long as I can." Rachel hesitated, her concern for him evident in her eyes. But there was no time to argue. With a final glance at him, she slipped into the ship, disappearing into the shadows. Inside, Rachel moved quickly, her training kicking in as she navigated the labyrinthine corridors. The Vrathis soldiers were disoriented by the energy pulse, giving her the advantage she needed. She followed the faint signal of Emily's tracking beacon, her heart pounding with each step. Finally, she reached a holding cell, its door sealed shut but weakened by the artifact's interference. Using a makeshift tool, Rachel pried the door open, revealing Emily inside. Her sister in arms was pale and thin, her eyes wide with shock and relief. "Rachel," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's me," Rachel replied, helping her to her feet. "We need to move. Now." As they made their way back toward the exit, the effects of the energy pulse began to fade. The Vrathis regained their footing, their weapons trained on the intruders. Rachel and Emily fought their way through, relying on quick reflexes and sheer determination to stay alive. Outside, John was struggling to maintain the connection. His body convulsed with the effort, his vision blurring as the artifact's power threatened to overwhelm him. Just as he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, Rachel appeared, dragging Emily behind her. Together, they stumbled away from the ship, collapsing onto the icy ground as the artifact's energy dissipated completely. For a long moment, they lay there, gasping for breath, the sounds of battle fading into the distance. John's mind was foggy, his body racked with pain, but he managed to turn his head toward Emily. "You're safe," he said weakly, a small smile tugging at his lips. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." As the three of them huddled together in the freezing cold, John knew the fight wasn't over. The artifact's secrets were still hidden, its true potential untapped. But for now, they had won a small victory, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could still find a way to survive. The stars above shimmered faintly, casting a pale glow over the icy landscape. Somewhere beyond them, the Vrathis regrouped, preparing for their next move. But for the first time in months, John felt a flicker of hope. They had faced the impossible and lived to tell the tale. And as long as they kept fighting, there was still a chance. For Emily, for Rachel, for all of them. The icy wind howled around them as John, Rachel, and Emily made their way back to the transport vehicle. Each step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion weighing down their bodies and minds. John leaned heavily on Rachel, his strength nearly gone after pushing the artifact to its limits. Emily walked beside them, her face pale but determined, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The Vrathis ships loomed in the distance, their dark forms casting long shadows over the frozen wasteland. When they reached the vehicle, Rachel helped John into the passenger seat before climbing into the driver's side. Emily sat in the back, wrapping a blanket tightly around herself to ward off the cold. No one spoke as the engine roared to life, the hum of its motors blending with the eerie silence of the Antarctic landscape. They drove in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of what they had just done and what still lay ahead pressing down on them. Back at the bunker, the team greeted their return with a mix of relief and concern. Dr. Laura Bennett rushed to John's side, her medical kit in hand, while others helped Emily settle into a chair. Despite her weakened state, Emily insisted on sharing what she knew about the Vrathis and their plans. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she described the alien invaders' intentions: to strip Earth of its resources and use its population as laborers or worse. "They're not just here to conquer," Emily said, her words cutting through the tension in the room. "They're here to consume. If we don't stop them now, there won't be anything left." John listened quietly from his cot, his body aching but his mind racing. He thought about the artifact, its power, and the visions it had shown him. It wasn't just a tool. It was alive, or at least part of something greater than himself. The beings who had created it had entrusted it with knowledge and energy beyond human comprehension, and now it had chosen him to wield it. But at what cost? Rachel stood nearby, her arms crossed as she processed Emily's words. She turned to John, her expression resolute. "We need to use the artifact again. Not just to disable their fleet, but to end this once and for all." John shook his head, his voice weak but firm. "I can't control it fully. Pushing it too far could destroy everything, including us." "Then we find another way," Rachel replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We've come this far. We can't give up now." Over the next few hours, the team worked tirelessly to refine their plan. Using data gathered during John's previous connection with the artifact, they developed a new strategy. Instead of relying solely on John to interface with it, they would amplify its power using external equipment, allowing him to focus on directing its energy rather than sustaining it. It was risky, but it gave them a fighting chance. As preparations continued, John found himself alone with Rachel in a quiet corner of the bunker. She handed him a cup of hot tea, her gaze softening as she studied his face. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "No one would blame you if you stepped back." "I do have to," John replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It chose me for a reason. I can't walk away, not when so much is at stake." Rachel nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Just promise me one thing. Don't let it take you completely. Whatever happens, remember who you are." John met her gaze, gratitude swelling in his chest. For so long he had carried the burden of guilt and failure, convinced he wasn't strong enough to make a difference. But Rachel's unwavering belief in him had reminded him that he wasn't alone. Together they could face anything, even the impossible. The final assault began under the cover of darkness. The team transported the artifact to a secure location near the edge of the Vrathis perimeter, setting up the amplification equipment around it. John took his place at the center, the electrodes strapped to his temples once more. As he activated the interface, the familiar surge of energy coursed through him, stronger and more intense than ever before. This time, however, he wasn't alone. The team worked in sync, feeding the artifact's power outward in controlled bursts, creating waves of energy that disrupted the Vrathis fleet. From the bunker, Rachel and Emily watched anxiously as the alien ships shuddered under the assault. Explosions lit up the night sky, sending shockwaves rippling across the ice. The Vrathis fought back, their weapons firing relentlessly, but the artifact's energy shield held firm, protecting those below. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually succeed, but then something changed. The artifact's hum grew louder, its glow brighter, almost blinding. John cried out, his body convulsing as the power overwhelmed him. Images flooded his mind faster than he could process, civilizations rising and falling, stars collapsing into black holes, endless cycles of creation and destruction. Amidst the chaos, he saw Emily's face, her voice calling out to him. "You have to let go," she said, her words echoing in his mind. Trust it. With a deep breath, John released his grip on the artifact, surrendering to its will. In that instant, the energy surged outward, engulfing the Vratha's fleet in a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, the ships were gone, reduced to nothing more than ash drifting on the wind. Back at the bunker, the team erupted into cheers, their voices filled with relief and disbelief. But John remained motionless, his body limp as the electrodes fell away. Rachel ran to his side, her heart pounding as she checked for a pulse. To her relief, he was still alive, though unconscious. Hours later, John awoke in the medical bay, his vision blurry but his mind clear. Rachel sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You did it," she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "You saved us." John shook his head, his voice hoarse. "Not me. The artifact. It guided me, showed me what needed to be done." "And you trusted it," Rachel replied. "That's what matters." As the days passed, the world began to heal. The Vrathi's threat was gone, their fleet obliterated by the artifact's power. Survivors emerged from hiding, coming together to rebuild what had been lost. John, Rachel, and Emily became symbols of hope, their story spreading across the globe as proof that humanity could overcome even the greatest challenges. But John knew the artifact's role wasn't finished. Its presence lingered in his mind, a quiet reminder of the responsibility he now carried. He couldn't explain why it had chosen him or what it truly wanted, but he knew one thing for certain. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a gift, a chance for humanity to rise above its flaws and strive for something greater. In the weeks that followed, John and Rachel stood together on a hill overlooking the ruins of the research facility. The artifact had ascended into the sky, its form dissolving into light as it disappeared among the stars. John watched it go, his heart heavy but hopeful. "What happens now?" Rachel asked, breaking the silence. "We keep going," John replied, his voice steady. "We honor what it gave us, and we make sure it wasn't wasted." Rachel nodded, her hand finding his. Together they turned away from the horizon and began the long journey home, ready to face whatever came next.